presentation mode. So we left off in our last study talking about how God can manifest himself as an angel, how he can manifest himself as the commander of the Lord's army. He has multiple as the word, multiple ways to manifest himself. And the conclusion that we came to is that the ancient Jews had this uh, concept of there being two Yahwehs, right? And we know now that the second embodiment of Yahweh, who showed himself as the Word or as the angel or as the commander, is a prefiguring of Jesus Christ, who came, the Word made flesh. Um, and so we see the origin of this concept of the Trinity. We know that the Spirit of God also is written about in the Old Testament, and we hear more directly about the Spirit of God in the New Testament. And so what we took away from that last week's study is that there's one God, but that God exists as multiple, and I'm saying multiple, not in that it's 1,000 different, persons in the Godhead. We know that there are only three, but as multiple persons who can exist simultaneously. So the Father, the Son, and we know the Holy Spirit is also God. So we're gonna kind of keep pushing with this idea because this section of the book is dealing with the Exodus and is dealing with Moses. And there's a in the next couple of chapters, next few chapters, we're gonna see a theme start to develop about how God has chosen Israel. He called out Abraham or Abram at the time, later Abraham, and made him the patriarch, the father of many nations. Made a promise to him that his seed would be as numerous as the sand on the seashore. Prophesied to him that they spend time in Egypt, 400 years to be exact. And then while they were in Egypt, he called Moses, right? And Moses became the representative on earth for God as it relates to Israel. So we're going to see a pattern that starts to develop. Later on, he called David. And then we know the ultimate embodiment was when God came himself in the person of Jesus Christ. So we're going to talk about the Exodus and how Yahweh distinguished himself from other gods, right? So this is a slide that I used before, but I just kind of added to it. But there's some events that inform Old Testament theology, some major events. Obviously, the fall, the divine transgression that was discussed in Genesis 6 when uh, the Nephilim were in the earth and when the sons of God intermarried with human women and they had offspring, and that was basically they crossed a boundary that they should never have crossed. And even during that time, Noah existed. Noah was there when the flood happened. He built the ark. We know that. During the fall, it was Adam and Eve and the serpent. There's always this contrast between the one who Yahweh chooses and the one who's against Yahweh, right? So then, after the flood, we had Babel, and then the disinheritance of the nations that happened as a result of Babel. And then during that time, you have Abram, and then you have this divine intelligence giving the people, the intelligence to build Babel and want to, build a tower to heaven, try to recreate Eden on earth. And then after that, the section that we're dealing with now is dealing with pre-Egypt, Egypt, and the Exodus and post-Exodus, right? So that's some of Genesis. We talked about Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, how they saw God. And then during and after the Exodus, right? So we have Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Moses. And when we get to Moses, we can insert Pharaoh as the antagonist. Just like in every period, there was an antagonist, the serpent, the Nephilim, the sons of God, in the case of the divine transgression. Uh, and you had these other Elohim and other beings giving the people the intelligence to build the Tower of Babel. So now when you get to Moses, you can insert Pharaoh because Pharaoh now becomes a critical person in this whole theme of what Yahweh is trying to do in recreating his family or bringing his family back together from the fall. All right. So the question becomes, who is like Yahweh? And the reason that question is asked is because there are other gods that exist, right? We already know that. We've been studying this now for 16 set. This is week 18. So we've been studying this for up to the point now where we ought to understand that there's competition in the universe created by Yahweh. They chose to rebel against him, but there's competition in the universe. And so when Yahweh showed himself to Abraham, and God prophesied to Abraham that his people would spend time in Egypt for 400 years. That's in Genesis 15. And then after that, God actually instructed the people to go to Egypt. Let's turn to that Genesis 46, verses 3 and 4. Genesis 46, verses 3 and 4. And I'm going to read 15 too, if I can find it. My pages are all stuck together. Genesis 15, 12 through 16, it says, Now, when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and behold, terror and great darkness fell upon him. Verse 13, God said to Abram, Know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, where they will be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. But I will also judge the nation whom they will serve, and afterward they will come out with many possessions. Verse 15, As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You'll be buried at a good old age. Then in the fourth generation, they will return here. He's talking about where Abram was, which was Haran or Canaan, which is where the Israelites were trying to get to when they left Egypt. And he says, Then in the fourth generation, they will return here, for the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet complete. So he prophesied to Abram that the Israelites would be in Egypt for 400 years, right? But then in Genesis 46, he sent them there. Let's turn to that right quick. In Genesis 46, he actually sent them to Egypt. And it was a means of protection. He sent them to Egypt. And really what you can see from this story is how God works. He literally allowed Joseph to be sold off to the Midianites, who took Joseph to Egypt. His brother sold, y'all know the story. He had the coat of many colors. He had the dream about the wheat bowing down before him. And his brothers got jealous of him, so they sold him off to this caravan who ended up transporting him to Egypt. And then he gets to Egypt and becomes Pharaoh's second in command. So, but he sent the people later, and they ended up becoming slaves, but they weren't slaves initially. They became slaves when Pharaoh got jealous and the Egyptians got jealous because the Israelites started to grow in number and in stature and in power. But let's look at it. Genesis 46, I'm going to read 1 through 4. It says, So Israel set out with all that he had, and that's Jacob, and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. And it says in verse 2, God spoke to Israel in visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, Here I am. He said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt. See, so he's telling Jacob, now, do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you a great nation there. Verse 4, I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also surely bring you up again, and Joseph will close your eyes. So now God is telling Jacob that Joseph is going to be the one who closes his eyes, or the one who buries him, right? But if you know the story, if you keep reading, Jacob was worried about Joseph when Joseph was away, and then he sent his brothers into Egypt to buy grain. And so when they got to Egypt, y'all know this story, right? Joseph was a very powerful person in Pharaoh's administration, and they didn't recognize him because he had grown up. He looked different, so they didn't recognize him. But when they found out it was him, he ended up sending for Jacob and for Jacob to come there. So all of them came and they ended up settling in Goshen. So they get to Egypt, and of course, again, Pharaoh becomes jealous over time because they became too numerous and too powerful. So the question that the author asked here, and it goes back to the question at the title, the title, who is like Yahweh? Like, why would God send his people to a nation that was under the dominion of another God or another set of gods, right? Because if you recall from Deuteronomy 32 and recall what happened in Genesis 12, that disinheritance happened after Babel. So God set the members of the divine council, the sons of God, the Elohim, he placed the nations under their dominion. He just washed his hands and then he pulled out Israel as his inheritance, right? So, in light of all of that, like, why would God send his people to a nation that was under the dominion of another God? That's the question that the author asked. And I wrestle with this because I started thinking, like, why would you send the people there? Uh, and I understand that he had already prophesied it. I understand that he told Abraham that, but it's almost like our life. Like, sometimes God will allow us into dangerous territory. And it's almost like, why do I have to go this route, God? Why are you doing this? Like, what's the purpose? And the purpose is always his glory. It always comes back to his glory and him getting glory out of delivering us from those situations. And so that's what ends up happening here, right? So the Israelites that were in Egypt, that were enslaved, that were crying out to God on a daily basis until God finally sent Moses, they understood that they were supernatural in origin, right? Because Abraham obviously was first, but then you had Isaac and Jacob. But Isaac was a supernaturally conceived child, right? Sarah was barren before Isaac was born, but God touched her womb and allowed she and Abraham to conceive a child, right? Abraham was worried that he would have to give his inheritance to a servant, right? And then they went and tried to do it on their own with Hagar, but obviously that blew up in their faces, right? So now the people in Egypt understood their origin, they understood where they were from, who they belonged to. And so now this question of deliverance comes up, right? That God is a deliverer and that he's not only a deliverer, but he is the most powerful of all the gods. And so when God sent Joseph into Egypt to avoid famine and made Abraham this promise that he was going to deliver them after this time, this is what would bring glory to God. This situation, right? The deliverance and the salvation from that Egyptian predicament. That's what will make Yahweh known to the whole world, right? And it would solidify his position as the King of glory, right? As the God of all gods. So let's look at that in Exodus 5 and verse 2. Exodus 5 and verse 2. I'm sorry if the pages are loud, but they all stuck together. So let's look at it. Exodus 5, we're going to look at 1 and 2. Because again, I'm trying to paint a picture here of, like, this was a providential thing. This was God's prerogative in doing this because God knew what he was doing. He knew when he called Abram out how he was going to get glory out of those descendants, that multitude of descendants that would come from Abraham's loins, his own loins. He knew what he was going to do prior to that, right? Prior to calling Abram out, he knew this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to take Abram, I'm going to bless his wife's womb. And from his wife's womb, I'm going to bring Isaac. And Isaac is going to have Jacob. And Jacob has his 12 sons. And that's where all your descendants are going to come from. And now I'm going to send them into Egypt first to protect them from famine. But then I'm going to also use that situation to show my power and my glory, right? Look at what it says in Exodus 5:1. It says, and afterwards Moses and Aaron came and said to Pharaoh, thus says the Lord God of Israel, let my people go that they may celebrate a feast to me in the wilderness. Now here's the thing. Here's Pharaoh's response. But Pharaoh said, who is the Lord that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? I don't know the Lord. And besides, I will not let Israel go. So that now becomes the issue, right? It's not who is like the Lord. Now the Egyptians and other nations are asking, who is the Lord? In a sarcastic way, like, who is he? I don't know him. And I'm really not studying him. I'm putting that in modern vernacular. I'm really not worried about him. And so now what has happened is Pharaoh has basically picked a fight with God. And that matters in the spiritual or supernatural realm. That matters because Pharaoh was seen as a representative of a higher being. He's seen as the son of a higher God. We're going to talk about that in a second. But he asked, who is the Lord? Right? Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I don't know the Lord. And besides, I will not let Israel go. So now Pharaoh and the other nations and the Egyptians and they're asking not who is like Yahweh, but who is Yahweh. We don't know him. His name don't ring bells around here, right? So from that point, it was that at that point that Israel was used as an instrument of God's glory, as an instrument to show the other nations. And you'll see that a lot, even when Moses was leading them in the wilderness. And one time, well, more than one time, but one particular time when God was angry with the people, one of the things that Moses used to basically as a bargaining chip to put on the table and say, God, if you kill everybody and wipe them out, the nations are going to say that you can't deliver, right? And when Moses said that, God relented from the calamity. But it's not just the nations, but the gods who have dominion over those nations as well, right? That's a in the supernatural realm. That's what we're dealing with. So it's not just the people of those nations, but the gods who have dominion over them. So this was now Yahweh's opportunity to assert himself again. Right. So let's talk about the other nations and the people um, who were, I don't want to call them haters, but they didn't know the Lord. Let's talk about it. So because the Canaanites knew about Yahweh, they knew about his deeds of power. Turn to Joshua chapter 2. Let's look at verses 8 through 10. And we're going to go back to Exodus 15. Actually, let's go to Exodus 15 and 18 first, and then we'll go to Joshua. Um, let's go to Exodus 15. And I hope this is making sense. And if not, just say something. You can unmute or you can put a comment or a question in the chat, and we can pause and discuss it. Exodus 15, verses 16 through 18. Let's look at that. And this is after the Israelites had crossed the Red Sea. It says, let me see, 16 through 18. I'm going to read 15. It says, then the chiefs of Edom were dismayed, the leaders of Moab. This is Moses now. Moses is now singing a song to God in praise for his deliverance of them from Egypt and from Pharaoh's army. So it says, Then the chiefs of Edom were dismayed. The leaders of Moab, trembling, grips them. All the inhabitants of Canaan have melted away. So there's that, again, that talk about the people in Canaan knowing, hearing about this. Verse 16, terror and dread fall upon them. By the greatness of your arm, they are motionless as stone until your people pass over, O Lord, until the people pass over whom you have purchased. Verse 17, you will bring them and plant them in the mountain of your inheritance, the place, O Lord, which you made for your dwelling, the sanctuary, O Lord, which your hands have established. Verse 18, the Lord shall reign forever and ever. So Moses is singing this song and he's talking specifically about Canaan and where they're going and how God is going to take them there and how the Canaanites are going to tremble because of God, because of Yahweh. So again, this is God's deeds of powers are now known, in other lands because of what he did in Egypt and because of what he did to Pharaoh, right? Those plagues that God sent against Egypt were a direct attack on the gods who presided over Egypt. We're going to talk about that shortly. Let's go to Exodus 18 and verse 11. It says, let me go to 10 because I want to give it some context. 10, this is Jethro talking to Moses. Jethro said, blessed be the Lord who delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians and from the hand of Pharaoh, and who delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. And then it says in verse 11, now Jethro is not an Israelite. Jethro is a Midianite. So he's a Gentile, right? Or he's a Canaanite. And so with Jethro is saying this is big because the news of this deliverance traveled, right? And so it says, now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods. Indeed, it was proven when they dealt proudly against the people. And so Jethro is giving God his props, and Jethro is not an Israelite. Moses married into his family. His wife is a Midianite, right? Because Moses spent time in Midian hiding out after he killed a man. He ended up killing a man for treating one of his countrymen, mistreating him. So Moses is married to a Midianite. And so now Jethro says, now I know, Exodus 18, verse 11. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods. Indeed, it was proven when they dealt proudly against the people. Right? Let's go now to Joshua 2, verses 8 through 10. Joshua chapter 2, verses 8 through 10. Let me get it right, too. All right. Let's look at what it says. Now, it says, before they lay down, she came up to them on the roof and she said, this is Rahab talking. She said, I know the Lord has given you the land. Again, Rahab is not an Israelite. Right? She said, they live in Jericho. Now, before they lay down, she came up to them on the roof and said to the men, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land have melted away before you. For we have heard, again, this is one of the reasons for Egypt and the Exodus was for Yahweh to assert himself again and prove to not only the other gods, but the people whom they were charged to have dominion over, even prove to them, I am the God of all gods. So he says, verse 10, Joshua chapter 2, we have heard now how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. So the word is out. The word is out, and that's on purpose. And all of this stems from the fact that God sent Joseph first into Egypt. God allowed Joseph to ascend to power. God then uses Joseph to bring the rest of his family into Egypt. And then eventually they become enslaved and oppressed. and then God sends in Moses to deliver them. All of this is a part of a large tapestry that God is weaving together for his own glory. And that's it. And truth be told, all of our lives are like that, right? You ever sat back and really thought about, contemplated, like why God allowed certain things to happen? And then when you add it all up and you get to the summation of it, you realize that at the end of the day, he got glory out of it some kind of way, right? And that's his goal, is to deliver us, to keep us, to protect us, to bless us, all of these things, that to chastise us, whatever he has to do. But at the end of the day, it's his glory that's going to be renowned. And it's his glory that's going to be heard about and testified about. Let's look at Joshua 9 and 9. I'm going to look at 7 through 9. Then the men of Israel said to the Hivites, perhaps you are living within our land. How then shall we make a covenant with you? But they said to Joshua, we are your servants. Then Joshua said to them, who are you and where do you come from? They said to him, your servants have come from a very far country because of the fame, that word fame literally is glory, because of the fame of the Lord your God. For we have heard the report of him and all that he did in Egypt. Verse 10. And all that he did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon, king of Heshbon, and to Og, king of Bashan, who was at Ashtaroth. So again, the Canaanites and all the other Gentile nations that were not Israel knew who God was, what he was about. And so now this deliverance and then subsequent transplantation to Canaan, it was intended to send a message to everybody, to the people as well as to the other gods who existed, right? If you look at Numbers 14, let's go to Numbers 14. Numbers chapter 14. I'm trying to get it. Page is stuck together again. Verses 15 and 16. Look at what it says. I'm going to read 13 through 16. But Moses said to the Lord, then the Egyptians will hear of it. Let me go up to 11, because this is one of those instances where Moses is pleading with the people, pleading with God for the people, and telling God, your rep is on the line, right? You brought them out of Egypt. You allowed them to have that exodus, but now your reputation is on the line. Verse 11, the Lord said to Moses, how long will this people spurn me? And how long will they not believe in me, despite all the signs which I perform in their midst? Verse 12, I will smite them with pestilence and dispossess them, and I will make you into a nation greater and mightier than they. Verse 13, but Moses said to the Lord, this is Moses bargaining and pleading for the people, just like Abraham bargained and pleaded for Lot. But Moses said to the Lord, then the Egyptians will hear of it, for by your strength you brought up this people from their midst, and they will tell it to the inhabitants of this land. They've heard that you, O Lord, are in the midst of this people, for you, O Lord, are seen eye to eye while your cloud stands over them. And you go before them in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Verse 15. Now, if you slay this people as one man, then the nations who've heard of your fame or your glory will say, because the Lord could not bring this people into the land which he promised them by oath, therefore he slaughtered them in the wilderness. So now you see Canaan was an integral part in the story, because God had to get them to Canaan by hook or by crook. And the reason is because if he didn't, Moses, as Moses says, the people, the nations will hear about it, and they will say, oh, the only reason he slaughtered the people was because he couldn't deliver them the promise that he gave them. Let's look at Deuteronomy 9 and 28. Deuteronomy 9 and 28. But that's one of those situations where Moses was telling God, your glory is on the line. And, you don't want to slay the people in the wilderness and leave them here because everybody's going to hear about it. And all of the things you did to bring them out of Egypt are going to get replaced by what you couldn't do. All right, Deuteronomy 9 and verse 28. I'm gonna read 25 through 28. I think I see a question in the chat. Let me go back in here. All right, Deuteronomy, uh, where am I? 9 and 28. Deuteronomy 9:28. I'm gonna read 25 through 28. It says, so I fell down before the Lord 40 days and nights, which I did because the Lord had said he would destroy you. Verse 26, I prayed to the Lord and said, O Lord, do not destroy your people, even your inheritance, whom you've redeemed through your greatness, whom you brought out of Egypt with a mighty hand. Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Do not look at the stubbornness of this people or at their wickedness or their sin. Otherwise, the land from which you brought us may say, because the Lord was not able to bring them into the land which he had promised them, and because he hated them, he's brought them out to slay them in the wilderness. Verse 29 says, yet they are your people, even your inheritance, whom you have brought out by your great power and by your outstretched arms. Right? So now again, there's this competition. It looks like a competition. Now God or Yahweh is pitted against all of these other gods. And this pivotal moment in the history of Israel is leaving Egypt and going into Canaan. Right. And it's interesting. This really gave me pause when I was looking at it, because I started thinking, they were in Egypt for 400 years and protected. And as I was pondering the question, why would God send them to Egypt, to be enslaved? They were protected in Egypt. And I started thinking about the fact that when they left Egypt, more people died when they left, it seemed like, than when they were there. And that's because when they left Egypt, they started getting stubborn and obstinate, and they started rebelling against God and wanting to go back into slavery. But that's another topic. It's just something that something to think about. Uh, let's go to Joshua 7 and 9. Right, and again, it's the same thing. This deliverance and this transplantation, getting the people to Canaan, was a big deal because everybody was watching. Right, so let's go to Joshua 7 and verse 9. Joshua 7 verse 9. I'm going to start at verse 6. It says, then Joshua tore his clothes and fell to the earth on his face before the ark of the Lord until the evening. Both he and the elders of Israel, they put dust on their heads. Joshua said, verse 7, Joshua said, alas, O Lord, why did you ever bring this people over the Jordan only to deliver us into the hand of the Amorites to destroy us? If only we had been willing to dwell beyond the Jordan. O Lord, what can I say, since Israel has turned their backs before their enemies? Verse 9, for the Canaanites and all the inhabitants of the land will hear of it, and they will surround us and cut off our name from the earth. And what will you do for your great name? So again, getting to Canaan is a big deal. And some of us, even now, have some Canaans in our lives that we're trying to get to, and we're being besieged by enemies. Sometimes the enemy is from within because we do things that get us off track. Sometimes the enemy is external, but in the midst of all of that, God is still in control. And whatever God promised, God is going to deliver, point blank. Let's look at real quick at 2 Samuel chapter 7 and verse 23. And then we're going to go on to the next point. 2 Samuel 7 verse 23. I'm going to start at 22. For this reason, you are great, O Lord God, for there is none like you. This is David's prayer. He says, for this reason, you are great, O Lord, there's none like you, and there's no God beside you, according to all that we have heard with our ears. And what one nation on the earth is like your people Israel, whom God went to redeem himself as a people and make a name for himself, and to do a great thing for you, and awesome things for your land before your people, whom you've redeemed for yourself from Egypt, from nations, and from their gods. Right? So you see, even David recognizes that God has redeemed Israel from Egypt. He's redeemed them from other enemy nations and from other gods. Right? So that deliverance, the Exodus, and then the entrance into Canaan is a big deal in the earthly realm and in the spiritual realm. And then when you deal with the Exodus, right, you're dealing with the gods of Egypt, right? Those who had dominion over Egypt. And Pharaoh again is like a divine representative of Egypt's god Ra. And so he's the son of Ra. That's what they considered him. They considered all their pharaohs to be divine and have a connection to the spiritual realm, right? So let's go right back to Exodus 12 and 12. And before we do that, we're closer to Numbers. Let's go to Numbers 33 and verse 4. Numbers 33 and verse 4. I'm going the wrong way. Numbers 33. I'm gonna read 1 through 4. It says, "These are the journeys of the sons of Israel by which they came out of the land of Egypt by their armies under the leadership of Moses and Aaron. Moses recorded their starting places according to their journeys by the command of the Lord, and these are their journeys according to their starting places." Verse 3. "They journeyed from Ramses in the first month, on the 15th day of the first month. On the next day after the Passover, the sons of Israel started out boldly in the sight of all Egyptians, while the Egyptians were burying all their firstborn, whom the Lord had struck down among them. The Lord had also executed judgments on their gods." So the Exodus events, the plagues, the last plague, which was the plague of the firstborn, when you really think about what that plague meant, that firstborn plague, right? That's cutting off generations. The firstborn is like normally the oldest. And so if you cut the firstborn down, what you're cutting off is that legacy, right? And so that was all on purpose. And then if you look at Exodus 12 and 12, it also recounts that night where the 10th plague happened. Exodus 12 and verse, I'm going to look at 11 and 12. It says, "Now you shall eat it in this manner, with your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover." Verse 12, "For I will go through the land of Egypt on that night, and I will strike down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against, and this is the key part right here, and against the gods of Egypt, I will execute my judgments." Right? So when you look at that, and he says, "I am the Lord" at the end of that verse, when you look at that, this is literally the plagues uh, and all the other miracles that happen. All of that is literally spiritual warfare. It is God uh, showing himself mighty against the gods of Egypt. And in you know, to extend that even further, he's also showing himself mighty to the other gods who exist, right? Because all the miracles, all the plagues, everything that he did against Egypt was a show of force, right? And then this would bring glory to him, because again, Pharaoh asked the question, "Who is Yahweh?" "Oh, you don't know me. You're gonna know me when I'm done," right? And at the end of the day, it was Israel who became the instrument of God's glory. And so now, uh, Egypt again, the main god of Egypt, Ra, and Yahweh is Israel's God. So now God calls Israel his son, because Pharaoh is Ra's son. So now you're going to see what happens when you mistreat my son or my child, right? That's what Hosea 11 and 1 says, "Out of Egypt, I've called my son," right? We talked about it already, but the plagues, again, that's spiritual warfare. That's Yahweh waging war against the gods of Egypt. And Moses understood this. He heard it in Exodus 12 and 12 when he told Moses, when he says that, let me go back to it and read it again. When he says to Moses in verse 12, for I will go through the land of Egypt on that night, and I will strike down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute my judgments. I am the Lord. So this is spiritual warfare, and it's Yahweh acting as the destroyer, going through Egypt on that last night. He says, I'm going to send the destroyer. That's what it says in Exodus 12 and 23. For the Lord will pass through to smite the Egyptians, and when he sees the blood on the lintel of the door of the two doorposts, the Lord will pass over the door and will not allow the destroyer to come into your house and smite you. So this is Yahweh coming and acting as the destroyer, executing this judgment against Egypt. Why? Because Pharaoh asked the question, who is Yahweh? I'm not going to listen to him. Who is he? I don't know him. All right. So if we look at that, we talked before about how God can manifest himself in different ways, but the destroyer and the angel of the Lord can be seen as the same, as one and the same. Turn to 2 Samuel 24 and verse 16. 2 Samuel 24 and verse 16. We'll spend a few more minutes, and then we'll stop and pick it up and finish it up on next week. I'm sorry, 2 Samuel 24 and verse 16. Because there's a link between, we've been talking about the angel, right, and the commander of the Lord's army and all of this, but there's a link between all of those characters. So 2 Samuel 24 and 16. Second Samuel 24 and 16. I'll read 15. So the Lord sent a pestilence upon Israel from the morning until the appointed time, and 70,000 men of the people from Dan to Beersheba died. Verse 16, when the angel stretched out his hand toward Jerusalem to destroy it, the Lord relented from the calamity and said to the angel who destroyed the people, it is enough. And he says, now relax your hand. And the angel of the Lord was by the threshing floor of Araunah, the Jebusite. And it says, then David spoke to the Lord when he saw the angel who was striking down the people and said, behold, it is I who have sinned, and it is I who done wrong. But these sheep, what have they done? Please let your hand be against me and against my father's house. So the angel and that word destroyed right here in verse 16. Is it 16? Yeah, verse 16, when the angel stretched out his hand towards Jerusalem to destroy it, and the Lord relented from the calamity and said to the angel who destroyed the people, it is enough. So that word is linked back to the angel of the Lord here in 2 Samuel 24, and linked back to that destroyer in Exodus 12 and 23. And then if we look at First Chronicles 21, verse 15, it's the same story, but it's just told from a different perspective. First Chronicles 21, verse 15. I'll read 14. So the Lord sent a pestilence on Israel. 70,000 men of Israel fell, and God sent an angel to Jerusalem to destroy it. But as he was about to destroy it, the Lord saw and was sorry over the calamity and said to the destroying angel. So you see that word destroy, destroy, destroy multiple times in this text. It says, he said to the destroying angel, it is enough now, relax your hand. And the angel of the Lord was standing by the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. And then David lifted up his eyes and saw the angel of the Lord standing between the earth and heaven with his drawn sword in his hand, stretched out over Jerusalem. So the sword, you see here, it talks about the sword in the hand of the angel who was a destroyer. And that sword we saw when Balaam was on the road, the angel was in the road with the sword drawn. And then we link all of that back to Exodus, the destroyer in Exodus 12 and 23 can be linked to the angel of the Lord, who is the Lord himself, right? We already talked about that. He showed up in the person of as the angel of the Lord, right? And then you'll see this in other places too, against the Assyrians. That's what it's in Isaiah 37 and verse 36. So the question now is, who is like the Lord, right? Not who is the Lord, but we go back to that original question, who is like the Lord, right? And so we read already in Exodus 15. Let's just go back to that, and we can wrap this up in a couple of minutes rather than saving it until next week. But let's go back to Exodus 15, because now the question is not who is the Lord, but rather who is like the Lord. Exodus 15 verses 11 through 13. Let's go back to that. Who is like you among, this is verse 11, Exodus 15. This is the song of Moses after crossing the Red Sea. Who is like you among the gods, O Lord? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in praise, working wonders? You stretch out your right hand, and the earth swallowed them. In your loving kindness, you've led the people whom you have redeemed. In your strength, you've guided them to your holy habitation. The peoples have heard, they tremble. Anguish gripped the inhabitants of Philistia. Verse 15. Then the chiefs of Edom were dismayed. The leaders of Moab, trembling, grips them. All the inhabitants of Canaan have melted away. So we go back to Exodus 15, and Moses asked the question, who is like you among the gods, right? Who is like you? So that statement alone verifies that there are other gods and they're real. They're not like mythological or fairy tale gods, that they exist. Otherwise, Moses wouldn't have said that. Uh, and we're going to pick up. I actually am going to stop here because I don't want to deal with this creation link to Exodus right now because it's going to take more than a couple of minutes. Uh, but we're gonna pause right there, and then we're gonna come back because there's a link in Exodus and a link in the 74th Psalm that ties together creation and the Exodus. But the overall concept is that God is the master of all of that. He's in control of everything. But I'm gonna stop there because I don't want to do that injustice and rush through it. So we're gonna stop here and we're gonna pick this up on next week, and then we'll finish this chapter, and then we'll move on to another chapter. But the takeaway is this: that Yahweh is the King of all the God. He's the King of glory in the unseen realm, and He's the ruler over all creation. And Israel is His portion. This is His inheritance. This is what He pulled out from this disinheritance that happened after Babel. So we're going to stop here. We'll pick this up on next week, and I'll pause now if there are any questions or comments, because I know that was a lot.